The ocean had been theirs for 11,000 years. They gave it back in 40 minutes. It started the way these things usually do, with something crawling out of the water that shouldn't have been there at all. Hannah Reyes was shooting stills down at Pier 7 when the figure pulled itself up over the dock edge. She almost missed the shot. Her eye was on the container cranes, hunting the geometry of rust and shadow, but motion dragged her lens sideways, and she got it. A man-shaped thing in a gray suit that moved wrong, joints bending at angles that made the back of your mind file a complaint. Steam rolled off its shoulders in the cold morning air. It walked 3 steps, stopped, turned its head precisely toward her camera, and then the shipping company car came off the road and went straight into the water. And in the chaos, she lost the figure entirely. She kept the photo. She didn't know yet what she'd caught. What she'd caught was the opening line of a declaration of war. Editor at the agency, a long-suffering man named Vogel, looked at the image for 4 seconds and told her to follow it up. What he meant was write 200 words and go home. What she heard was something else. She had a way of hearing things. The police file was thin. A kidnapping attempt on the Harbor Road, the target a doctor. Anselm Brouwer, former director of the European Oceanographic Survey, now retired. The car hadn't sunk. It had been dragged. Footage showed it moving laterally under the surface at speed, against the current, before disappearing at depth. 3 centimeters of the dock rail, where the figure had hauled itself up, were glass smooth, as though scoured by enormous heat. Vogel told her she was overcomplicating a road accident. She drove to Bremen to find Brouwer's granddaughter. Her name was Ida, and she was 26, and had her grandfather's exact look of restrained fury, the kind that lives behind the eyes and never quite reaches the mouth. She met Hannah in the kitchen of a house that smelled of machine oil and old books, and she poured coffee without being asked, and she said, "Someone else came yesterday. A man in a gray suit." Hannah set down her coffee. "He gave me a message," Ida said. "He said, tell everyone with ears. The abyss remembers what the surface forgot. The water is not yours. It never was." Then she slid a photograph across the table. It was a still from some kind of film footage, grainy and lit from below by something the wrong color, a deep amber orange that didn't match any bioluminescence Hannah had ever seen documented. It showed a city, not ruins, a city, towers, transit, structured light, population, 12,000 meters down. "My grandfather found it," Ida said. 40 years ago, he was told to lose the data. He did. He was told to forget about it. He couldn't. She looked at her hands. 3 days ago he was taken. Hannah drove back to the coast with the photograph and the coffee taste still in her mouth, and she understood that what she was looking at was not a story. It was the end of a very long silence. The message arrived at 6 UN member governments, simultaneously, delivered by the same method. Someone walked out of the ocean, handed it to whoever was nearest, and walked back in. The messengers moved through security cordons without triggering sensors. They registered no heat. They registered nothing at all on any instrument except the human eye, and 2 of the 6 recipients afterward reported that they weren't entirely sure what they'd seen. Their memory of the event having a strange blank quality, like trying to recall a dream mid-afternoon. The message was filmed before delivery, and those films were quietly destroyed. Contents leaked, as they always do, and the translation made it to Hannah's inbox through a chain of sources she would never fully trace. She read it 3 times before she believed it. It said, "We are older than your recorded time. We built the first cities when your ancestors were navigating by stars they had not yet named. The ocean floor is the sovereignty of the abyss, and we have permitted the surface civilizations to exist in peace for 12 millennia. That permission is now under review." It said, "You have one of our citizens in custody. Return her. Dismantle the weapon your engineer builds in the North Atlantic. These are not demands. They are the conditions under which you remain." It said, "We are patient. We have always been patient. Do not mistake patience for mercy." That last line was the one that stayed with Hannah. It was the line of something that had been watching for a very long time, and had finally decided it was done watching. She thought about the figure on the dock, the steam, The precision of that three-step walk. She thought about how much the world doesn't know about what lives in the deep ocean, and how the deep ocean goes down much further than most people remember. She filed her story. Vogel killed it. She posted it anyway. By the next morning it had 11 million reads. The weapon the message referenced, the one they wanted dismantled, was called the RSD-9 in its official paperwork, which stood for Hull Reinforced Strike Deterrent, which was bureaucratic code for something that had no real name because naming it would have required admitting it existed. The man who built it was named Harlan Voss, and he had not spoken to his daughter in 6 years. Hannah found him through Ida, which was not a coincidence. Ida was engaged to Voss's senior engineer, a broad-shouldered Swede named Lars, who had been with the project for 4 years, and who had the exhausted focus of someone who has been trying to finish one specific thing for a very long time. Voss lived on an island. That's not a metaphor, though it could have been. He had built his compound on a volcanic formation in the North Atlantic that appeared on no commercial maps and barely appeared on military ones. Accessible by submarine dock or seaplane, the island had a geothermal power plant, a small agricultural operation, a machine shop the size of a warehouse, and in a flooded cavern beneath it all, the thing itself. She got there because Lars drove her, and Lars drove her because Ida asked him to, and Ida asked him to because she was terrified, and because Hannah was the only journalist who had published the truth so far. And terror makes strange alliances. The submarine was unlike anything she had seen in any file or photograph or military documentation. It was 240 meters long. And it was black, and it had a drill bit the diameter of a railway tunnel mounted at the bow and wings like nothing aquatic or aerial. And it sat in the water with the absolute self-possession of something that did not doubt its own right to exist. It was called Fenrir. Voss was 63 years old, and built like someone who had once been large, and had since burned down to essentials. He had a white scar across his left jaw that he'd never explained to anyone. And he met Hannah in the dock overlooking the submarine, with his hands in his pockets, and the posture of a man who had been interrupted. You're the journalist," he said. "Yes. My daughter thinks I should talk to you. Your daughter also thinks you should call her back." Something moved in his face. "I know." He looked at the submarine. "I built it for us. Not for them. Not to give to a committee. We lose this war. And we will lose this war if we fight it the way governments fight wars. And there is no more negotiation. There is just management. There is just the abyss deciding what they permit. I did not spend 20 years with this machine so that humanity could be permitted. What is it for?" He looked at her for a long time. "Have you ever been in a fight?" he said. "Where the other person was bigger and faster and had been training longer and you had maybe 1 second to do something and you had to make it count?" "Yes, that's what it's for." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. They came for the island 3 days later, not with a fleet. That would have been easier to respond to. They came with the ocean itself, a sequence of microtremors that shouldn't have been possible, targeted seismic activity that moved like a hand closing, and then a section of the dock wall cracked open, and the water came in cold and dark, and carrying things with it. Shh. The things were soldiers. They moved through water the way humans move through air, effortlessly and in 3 dimensions. And they wore armor that looked grown rather than manufactured, articulated plates of something chitinous and dark, and they carried weapons that emitted no beam or projectile, just a field of focused resonance that turned solid matter to powder at short range. Hannah was in the machine shop when the alarms went. Lars was beside her. He said one word, "Fenrir," and they ran. Shh. The dock was chaos. Voss's crew was small, 47 people total, which was insane for a vessel that size, but the vessel was insane, and the crew had been selected and trained to be insane with it. They were not panicking. They were moving to stations with a grim focused efficiencies that she recognized from footage of aircraft carrier operations. The same pressed intentional motion, the same understanding that there was no room for anything that was not the task. She ran past a crewman named Chidi, who was wiring an emergency charge with the same expression he used when he was making coffee. She ran past two others, carrying ammunition in crates, stenciled with warnings she didn't have time to read. She ran past a woman named Petra, who was the navigation chief, and who was jogging toward the con with a tablet in one hand and a coffee mug in the other. And Petra caught her eye and said, "Get below," with the calm authority of someone who had planned for this. And Hannah got below. Crew locked in around her, like water filling a vessel. She had been on commercial submarines. She had been on a military diesel boat once, for a magazine piece. This was not like either of those. The control space of Fenrir was wide and low-ceilinged, and every surface was active. Screens, interfaces, readouts. And it smelled of machine oil, and something electrical, and slightly of Lars's coffee, because Lars was at his station, and he had brought his coffee, and the absurdity of that detail steadied her somehow. Voss was at the helm, not at a command chair, at the helm. Hands on the controls like someone who does not delegate the thing that matters most. "Casualty report," he said. "3 injured, dock level. No fatalities. All personnel aboard." That was Petra. "How many of them?" 17 confirmed in the water. More coming." He looked at the screens showing the dock flooding. He looked at the submarine around him. He said, very quietly as if to himself, "All right then." And Fenrir moved. The drill engaged 40 meters into the rock beneath the dock floor, and Fenrir bored straight down into darkness that had never seen anything built by human hands. Abyss soldiers in the dock had no frame of reference for what to do when the target went underground. Their weapons were optimized for water or vacuum. Not for this. The tunnel collapsed behind them. Hannah watched it on the aft cameras. 100 meters of rock ceiling shut like a wound, and the dock gone, and everything they'd left behind gone with it. And Voss watching it, and not saying a word about it because there was nothing to say. They drilled for 11 minutes, and then Fenrir wrangled into open water. Deep water, 4 kilometers down, in the thermocline, where the temperature dropped to 2 degrees, and the pressure was crushing, and the dark was absolute. The submarine's running lights came on. A dim red, navigation only, and the hull readouts showed external pressure in numbers that should have been incompatible with the existence of the vessel. "Where are we going?" Hannah asked. Lars answered without looking up from his station. "Down." "Down where?" "Their city," Voss said. "We're going to their city. That's..." She stopped. "That will start a war." The war started the moment they decided the ocean wasn't big enough for both of us. He adjusted something on his controls. 3 of my people. They took Brower. They want me to surrender this ship. Should I do that? And in that version, yes, the Abyss has leverage over every surface civilization for the rest of documented history. I didn't spend 20 years on this machine to hand them leverage. Petra spoke from navigation. 9,000 meters. Thermal signatures consistent with the city at bearing 270. Voss nodded. Hannah looked at Lars. Lars looked at his screens. "My grandfather was a fisherman," he said. For no reason except that he needed to say something. He always said the ocean gives back what it takes. Eventually. Is that true? I have no idea. He drowned in 1987. She almost laughed. In the circumstances, it was the most human thing she'd ever heard. The city of the Abyss was everything the photograph had suggested, and nothing she was prepared for anyway. It spread across a tectonic shelf 12,000 meters down, lit from within by a source that pulsed amber orange like a slow heartbeat, and it was vast, not city-sized in a familiar way, but civilization-sized. The accumulated architecture of 12,000 years, layers of construction like geological strata, the oldest parts at the base almost organic in their curves, the newer sections rising in spires that caught the cold current and channeled it in ways that served some function she couldn't name. Around the city, in the water, there were shapes. They were approximately serpentine, which is an inadequate word for what they were. They moved through the water the way thought moves through a mind, without visible effort, without apparent locomotion, simply arriving at positions by virtue of having decided to be there. The smallest of them was 100 meters long. The largest circled the city perimeter, and she couldn't see both ends of it at once. These were not soldiers. These were not technology. These were something older than either. Voss looked at them for a long moment. The Zero Lance, he said. I. That was a woman at the weapons console named Keiko, who had been with the project since the beginning, and who had the particular stillness of someone who has rehearsed for this exact moment many times in their head. Target the nearest one. Minimum power. I want to know what it does, not destroy it, Captain. I know what I'm doing, Keiko. She trusted him enough to comply. The weapon charged. Hana felt it in the hull, a vibration below sound. Something that her body understood before her ears did. And then it fired, and the nearest serpent froze. Not stopped. Froze. A sheath of ice formed along its forward third in 3 seconds, growing across its scales in geometric patterns that looked almost crystalline. And the creature's movement arrested completely. And it hung in the water column like something carved. The city's light pulsed faster. Once, twice. That got their attention, Lars said. Good! Voss opened a frequency. This is Harlan Voss, aboard FSS Fenrir. You have 3 of my people. I have your guardian's attention. Release my crew. Release Dr. Brower, or I show you what this machine was designed to do to infrastructure. Silence, not static. Silence, which was different. The frequency was active. Someone was listening. Then a voice came through, and it was beautiful and wrong. The way a chord played in a key that doesn't exist is beautiful and wrong. Harmonics stacked in ways human vocal cords don't produce. And it said, "You are one ship." Yes, Voss said. You cannot survive here. Probably not. A pause. But I can make it very expensive for you. Another silence. Hana watched the frozen serpent through the external cameras. The ice was receding. Slowly, the creature's biology burning back through the cold, but slowly enough. This is not what was agreed, the voice said. I didn't agree to anything. Your governments. My governments are surface governments. They manage surface concerns. This ship is not a surface concern. Voss's voice was utterly even. I am not asking for the world. I am asking for my people. Release them, and I will withdraw. Test me, and I will drill through your power generation until this city is dark. And I will leave, and I will come back with more ships. And you will have started the only version of this war that ends badly for both of us. The harmonics shifted. Something that was probably deliberation, though it was hard to read it as human deliberation. And then the city's amber pulse slowed, and 3 figures appeared at the pressure lock of the nearest tower, illuminated by the outer light, small and human-shaped at this distance, and 2 others. Keiko exhaled very quietly, stood up from his station, sat down again, said, "Okay," to no one in particular. Tst. Hannah thought about what she was going to write. Not the facts. The facts were easy, she could recite them in her sleep already. The thing she was trying to find was the true sentence, the one that would carry the whole weight of it. She kept it coming back to the steam off the figure on the dock, the way it had been patient, the way it had moved like something that had been waiting a very long time, and expected to keep waiting. And what Fenrir had said without words. Not today. The transfer was conducted at the pressure lock. Fenrir extended a docking collar, and Voss's people went out in suits and brought the 3 prisoners back through, and the whole operation took 11 minutes, which was 11 minutes during which anything could have gone wrong and nothing did. And that felt less like luck and more like a choice someone was making. Brower was 72 and had been a prisoner for 6 days, and he walked aboard Fenrir under his own power, refused the medical team's offer of a stretcher, accepted coffee, and said to Voss, "I knew you'd come. I told them you'd come. They didn't believe me." What did they believe? That you would negotiate, that you had too much to lose. He looked around the control space. They think like civilizations. Long timelines, patient strategies. They could not model someone who builds a 200-meter drilling submarine and hides it on a volcanic island for 20 years because he decided one day that humanity was going to need it. A thin smile. They are very old and they are very intelligent, and they have never met anyone like you. They've never met anyone with nothing left to protect, Voss said. Something in his seat when he said it that Hannah filed away. That slight catch, and she understood that it was not true. that he had things to protect, that the nothing was the armor he wore over them, because it was the only armor that worked. She looked at the daughter's face in her memory. The restrained fury, the coffee made without being asked, the photograph slid across the table. She thought, he will call her now. She thought, this is the part that doesn't make it into the story. This is the part that is the whole story. The abyss didn't let them leave quietly. They had been at depth for 40 minutes when the tremors started. Small at first. Resonance weapons, Keiko said, trying to determine if the hull had a frequency that would compromise it. Then larger. Then the second serpent uncoiled from the city perimeter and moved toward them. Voss didn't increase speed. He turned Fenrir around. Sir, Petra began. Log it, he said. Shh. Whatever happens next, log it. He brought the ship around to face the serpent, and the Zero Lance charged. And the two things regarded each other across 400 meters of absolute darkness, 12,000 meters, beneath the surface of an ocean that had been someone else's home for 11,000 years. The serpent stopped. Hannah would think about this later. She would think about it for months, turning it over, looking for the mechanism, because it was not the weapon that stopped it. The weapon was charged, but not fired. Something else stopped it. Something about the shape of Fenrir in the water, the 240 meters of it, the drill and the wings, and the absolute stillness of it, holding position in the deep. Something about the fact that it had turned around, that it had not run. The serpent hung in the water column for 11 seconds. Then it turned back toward the city. Navigation, Voss said. Take us home. The tremors stopped. She wrote the piece in Lars's cabin on the way back to the surface, sitting against the bulkhead with her knees up and her tablet across them, the hum of Fenrir's drives coming up through the hull, in a frequency she could feel in her back teeth. And she wrote for 4 hours without stopping. She wrote about the figure on the dock and the steam. She wrote about Ida's kitchen and the photograph lit amber from below. She wrote about the 6 governments and the message, and the patience it advertised. She wrote about Brower, saying they didn't believe he'd come, because they thought like civilizations. She wrote, what the abyss had not modeled, in 12,000 years of watching the surface, was this particular human habit, the one where we build the thing we don't have an immediate use for, because we want to know it's there. The emergency exit we install in a building that has never burned, the spare tire. The vaccine stockpiled for the pandemic that hasn't happened yet. The drill-equipped submarine built on a volcanic island by a man with nothing left to protect, which is to say a man protecting everything. They think in timelines, she wrote. We think in options. Then she deleted that last line because it was too neat, and the truth was messier than that. The truth was Voss standing at the helm, with his hands on the controls because he didn't delegate the thing that matters most. Truth was Lars bringing his coffee. Truth was Chidi wiring a charge with the same face he used at the coffee maker. The truth was Petra jogging, with her tablet and her mug. The coexistence of the catastrophic and the mundane, that is the specific texture of humans in crisis. She wrote about the serpent stopping. She wrote, I don't know why it stopped. I don't know if they calculated that the weapon would neutralize it, or if they calculated that the hull would not survive a direct engagement, or if they simply recognized something in the posture of a ship that turns to face you in the deep dark when it has no reason to do so, except stubbornness. Don't know which of these things stopped it. I suspect the abyss doesn't know either. I know we went down there. I know we went down there for 3 people, specifically because they were ours. I know we were not supposed to survive it, and we did. I know the city is still down there, and they are still down there. And this is not over, and I know that somewhere in the calculations of an intelligence that has been patient for 12,000 years, something has shifted. She sent the piece. She put the tablet down. She leaned her head against the bulkhead and felt the submarine move through the dark and the cold and the pressure, from 40 meters of water above her becoming 100, becoming 1,000, becoming the lightless thermocline, and then the beginning of the slow ascent toward the world that was theirs. She fell asleep before they broke the surface. She did not dream about Serpent the city or the soldiers coming through the cracked dock wall. She dreamed about Ida's kitchen and the coffee she'd been given without asking. And the photographs slid across a table in a house that smelled of machine oil and old books. And the amber light of a city in a dark no one had mapped. And the strange grace of something that doesn't know it's beautiful. In the debrief, 3 weeks later, a man from a government she was not permitted to identify asked Voss whether he considered what he'd done an act of war. Voss looked at him for a long time. "They took my people," he said. "They told 12 civilizations to surrender or remain. They called 12,000 years of watching the surface patience like it was a virtue." He paused. "I went and got my people back. If that's an act of war, that's because they defined the terms. You threatened their infrastructure. I made a credible argument. There's a difference." The man from the unnamed government made a note. "The Abyss has not responded since. No further incidents, I know. Do you think that will hold?" Voss was quiet for a moment. "I think they're recalculating. I think they ran a model for every possible response to their ultimatum, and this one wasn't in it. And I think now they're building a new model that includes us." He looked at the middle distance. "That's not peace. It's the precondition for it. And if they come again, then we go again." He said it with no particular drama, the way a plumber says they'll come back if the leak doesn't hold. It was the tone of someone who has built a machine and stocked the parts and knows what the maintenance schedule looks like. Chit. The man from the government made another note. Hannah sat in the corner of the debrief room with her tablet and did not take notes. She watched Voss's hands, which were still, and she thought about the harbor and the steam and the long patience of something very old and the particular kind of impatience that builds a drill submarine in a volcanic island cavern for 20 years, just in case. She thought about the serpent in the dark and the ship that turned around. She thought, 11,000 years of the ocean being theirs, 40 minutes to remind them it wasn't. Ida called her 2 weeks after the debrief. It was late, and Hannah was at her desk, and the harbor was visible through the window. The lights on the cranes reflected in the black water the way it always was, opaque, deep, holding whatever it held. "He called," Ida said. "My father he called. He told me he would." A pause. "Told him to." "I told him he was protecting the wrong things." Another pause, longer. "Is it over?" Hannah looked at the water. The harbor lights. The cranes making their geometry against the dark. Somewhere under that black surface, under millions of tons of water, there was a city that pulsed amber and had been there since, before anyone recorded anything. It was still there. It would still be there tomorrow. "No," she said, "but we bought something." "What?" "Time. The knowledge that we can buy it." She thought for a second. "That's actually most of it. Once you know you can do the thing becomes a different kind of problem." Ida was quiet. "Father is a very strange man," Hannah said. "I know. He built the right thing for the wrong reasons, and it turned out to be the right thing. I know that too." A small sound that might have been a laugh. "Cried. When I answered, he actually cried." Hannah didn't say anything. "I didn't know he could do that," Ida said. "Most people can," Hannah said. "It just takes the right moment." She stayed on the phone while Ida talked, about the house that smelled of oil and books, about Lars, about the amber photograph, about what she was going to do now that the story her grandfather had carried for 40 years had finally broken the surface. The harbor lights moved on the water. A container ship came in, its running lights, yellow-white, enormous and deliberate, and it moved up the channel and past the dock where Hannah had stood 3 months ago with her camera, where a figure had come out of the water and looked straight at her lens, and then walked back in. She thought. The ocean was theirs for 11,000 years, she thought. That ended on a Tuesday morning, 40 minutes after we decided we were done being managed, she thought. This is what she would write, one day, when she had the distance to write it true. Not the submarine or the city, or the serpent in the dark. Not the weapon, or the drill, or the government debrief. The photograph slid across a table. The coffee offered before she asked. An old man walking under his own power and refusing the stretcher. A man at the helm who didn't delegate the thing that mattered most. Crewman wiring a charge while with the same expression he used, making breakfast. The small human textures that the abyss, for all its 12,000 years of watching, had never learned to read. She said goodnight to Ida. She closed her tablet. She looked at the water. Somewhere down there, something very old and very patient was running new calculations. She was not afraid of that. Not exactly. She was instead something she'd have to find the right word for, something adjacent to ready. She left her desk light on when she went to bed, out of old habit, the way her mother had done, which was itself an old habit from an older world, where the light meant something specific about who was home and who was safe. It was a small signal. It meant nothing to anything that didn't know the language. She left it on anyway.